we had Craig Poplars from Tin House as our sort of industry insider. And he promised, and he said, okay, we would like to have a Tin House author and someone that would really wow our audience. And he said, let me think about it. And then almost immediately he said, I know, I've got the perfect person. And that's Rosalie Knecht. She's gonna wow you. And so I promptly tore through Who is Vera Kelly and thought it was a wonderful, original, and smart spy novel. I think the brilliance of it lies really in Vera's ability to negotiate identity in a heteronormative mid-century America. It's what really equips her to become a spy. The second installment of it, of Rosalie's Vera Kelly series, Vera Kelly Is Not a Mystery, was published Tuesday, and it's been listed as one of the best summer reads. So I'm very excited for it, and I can't wait to read it. And we are doubly lucky to be joined by Tracy O'Neill. And if you joined us a week ago when we hosted Rebecca Dennerstein Knight and Marie-Helene Bertino, both of whom praised Tracy and her novel Quotients as being absolutely brilliant without being prompted that she was coming in a week. Believer magazine called Quotients the first great novel of the post-WikiLeaks era. A review in the Brooklyn Rail compared Tracy's work to that of Thomas Pynchon, Philip K. Dick, and William Gibson. So it's been called a startling work of art that contains more artistry and intelligence than our times probably deserve. So welcome Rosalie and Tracy to Northshire Live. So excited. Rosalie,
thank you.
Tell us about Vera Kelly.
Thank you so much, and thank you to Tracy for doing this in the midst of her own kind of publicity work for her own stuff. And she recently finished her PhD and accepted a position at Vassar. So I just want to congratulate her for that. We haven't had a chance to have a one-on-one congratulatory drink over that for undisclosed reasons. So it is nice to see Tracy tonight. So yeah, I wrote Who is Vera Kelly, kind of coming to its sort of spy nature over time. And when I was done, I realized I had written a spy novel, and it had not occurred to me until I was finished that I could maybe write a couple more and sort of make it a series. After the first one, I realized that I wasn't really entirely done with this character, and that I wasn't, I didn't feel like her kind of emotional arc was completed. And I started working on the second one, and it was just really such a pleasure. I mean, it was like, since I knew this character already, I kind of knew this world and the setup already, I felt comfortable there. And it was, you know, I was writing it also during like a very complex and intense 2 years of our lives. A lot was happening and a lot was changing. And it was honestly one of the things that sort of got me through that period of time. And it's really nice to be kind of putting it out into the world right now. Having had that, it just feels very like that this book is like a friend who did something for me. And I'm like kind of glad to have it out there now. So yeah, in the first book, so Vera Kelly is a young woman who grows up in the suburbs outside of Washington, D.C. and moves to New York as a young woman, realizing that she's lesbian, and kind of joins into the underground gay scene in Greenwich Village. But is more or less closeted, of course, professionally, and gets recruited into working for the CIA, which she goes to Argentina on a surveillance job in 1966, which is, there was a kind of low-key coup in Argentina in 1966, which she's present for, and that was the first book. The second book, she has left the CIA, she's been disenchanted with the CIA, and she's made that kind of classic noir turn from sort of insider G-man to private detective, you know, private investigator. So this is, I think of them both sort of under the umbrella of noir, but the first one is a spy novel, the second one is technically a detective novel. I may be speaking too fast. I want to apologize. I'm gonna just slow down. So in the second one, she's in New York. She's, as the novel opens, she's broke, she's just gotten fired, and she's also just gotten dumped. And she sort of sets off on this project of, she gets a case, and she ends up having to travel and to sort of confront some things from her own past, and hope that you enjoy it. Should I go right into a short reading? Okay, so I'm just going to start from the beginning and just give you the first 2 pages. So at this point, where the first book left her, and you don't have to have read the first book in order to understand what's happening in this book, but where the first book left her, she was back in Brooklyn and had just quit her job as a surveillance person. And where this book opens, she has been working in television and has been dating a woman who teaches poetry at Brooklyn College. I didn't get an MFA, but somehow I found myself drawn to an opportunity to depict the poetry department of Brooklyn College. I don't know why that is. Okay, chapter 1, August 1967, Brooklyn, New York. The morning after Jane left me, I woke in a Russian diner that overlooked the boardwalk at Brighton Beach, sitting upright in the corner of a booth. I had always been grateful for an all-night restaurant. A waitress with red cheeks was refilling the cup of coffee in front of me and rotating the plate with its scraps of corned beef, clearing her throat politely. I sat up and thanked her. Through the fogged glass, I could see the gray ocean, pale and soft, meeting a paler sky. Down the beach, the wonder wheel at Coney Island was coming out of the pre-dawn dark. I put my hand over the mug and the waitress moved away. By my watch, it was 6:40 in the morning, which meant that it was almost 24 hours now since things had begun to go wrong. Jane had said, "I'm tired of waiting for you to want me here." She was standing in the hallway between my bedroom and the second floor bathroom, holding the powder pink bag with her makeup and toothbrush in it, wearing my dressing gown. "I don't have to move in, but you hardly talk to me." "I talk to you," I said. "About what?" she said. "About nothing. I turn around and you've left the room." "I talk to you," I said. "You say clever things, and when I try to answer you seriously, you make clever jokes," she said. "You can move in then," I said, becoming desperate. "You can move in. I've been stupid." "You know I can't," she said. "You would make me miserable." She waved her hand toward the hall, the stairs. "You practically faint when I leave my shoes on the rug." She brushed past me to my room. I leaned in the doorway and watched her getting dressed. My eyes were stinging. My nose was stinging. I sneezed. "I have a class to teach," she said. "I'll get the rest of my things later." "Don't go," I said. I set it into my cupped hand. She put her hand on my shoulder. "You're a nice girl, Vera," she said, "but you're impossible." Jane was noisy and hot, with a bright face. After she left, the house felt like a meat locker despite the August weather. I went for a long, blurry walk. When I got home, I stood in the kitchen for 15 minutes looking at the wall clock, and then had a whiskey and sat in the garden. The roses were blooming for the second time that year. They were yellow washed with pink like sherbet melting in a bowl of punch. The starling who lived under the eaves of the shed came out to scream at me. He thought the yard was his. It was 10 o'clock in the morning. It was time to go to work. I was one of the film editors for the news broadcast at the WKNY station near the Battery. I started leaking tears on the Q train over the river because the view was too big, and I could see the trees on Governor's Island, fizzing and dark in the sun. The summer would be over soon. I made it to my break before I called her. She had a telephone in her office at Brooklyn College, and she would have just finished her afternoon romantic poetry class. It rang twice, and she picked up. Jane, I said. "I think this is a mistake. I'll make it up to you." "Vera, it's too late," she said. "All right, I'm sorry." "What do you mean?" I was alone in the editing room, and I was keeping my voice low. George Kepler must have been listening from the switchboard, or patched in from another office. Later, I wondered if he had been listening to my calls for months, ever since he had cornered me at the bar, where the editors and runners went after the evening broadcast, and I had pushed him off, laughing. "What do you mean, it's too late?" I said. "Is there someone else?" She said nothing. "Christ, Jane, is there?" "There is?" "I didn't plan it this way," she said. I hung up and tried not to fall apart. My eyes were rattling in my head. I went to the stairwell and smoked a cigarette and then another. I returned to the editing room. My supervisor, Mr. Anderson, was there, standing with George Kepler, who looked very pleased. "Vera, I need to speak with you," Mr. Anderson said, and turned to indicate his office with a sweep of his hand, as if we were going to the theater together. "What for?" I said. George Kepler turned and walked away. The hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. "Privately," Mr. Anderson said. He shut the door behind us and pointed to a chair. His windows looked out on a post office lot with a huge doorway to an underground garage where fleets of mail trucks came and went in the gloom. Sunlight never touched the street in this part of town. There's a character clause in your employment contract, he said. He looked at me as if I should grasp his meaning. And then I did. A mask descended. I tried to keep my voice calm. Can you make yourself clear? I said. I have a lot of work to do. No, you don't, he said. You're in violation of your employment contract. We can't keep people on staff who live that way. He pushed back from his desk and began searching in his coat pocket for his matches. His color was rising, and he wouldn't look at me. I told them you would be a problem, he said, when they first promoted you from the floor. It was obvious to anyone with eyes. They didn't listen to me. He found the matches. We'll mail you your paycheck. You'll take his word, I said. George Kepler is the worst editor you have. He takes twice as long as the rest of us. You're wasting my time, he said. There were 2 more editors at their desks when I came back to get my things. George was standing at the side of the room, watching one of the monitors, but he looked over, and I stared until he turned away. I packed everything into my purse and a shopping bag I found in the lounge. I had never kept much at my desk anyway. There was a tense silence while I sifted through my papers. The youngest editor, a sweet boy named Carl, was concerned. Going somewhere, he said. Nice to know you, Carl, I said. It had been. He looked surprised. And then I was back out on the street again. The awful thing is that it was a beautiful day. One of those slow, rich August afternoons when the light hit the battery like the inside of a cathedral. I walked slowly, having nowhere I wanted to be now or for the foreseeable future. A man at a hot dog cart was having an argument with a seagull, which was hopping away with half a pretzel. 2 children were racing each other to the railing overlooking the water. The leaves in a stand of little birches were all alight and shivering. I had a pain in my chest, as if I'd swallowed too much air. I walked as far as the Staten Island ferry terminal and sat on a bench for a long time, doing nothing at all and not seeing much until it occurred to me that I could smoke. I smoked 3 or 4 cigarettes. The 6 o'clock ferry was leaving, and I got on and went to Staten Island and came back just to feel the sea wind in my hair. I stood at the railing with a crowd of happy visitors taking pictures of the Statue of Liberty and tried to think what to do with myself. The beginning? Thank you. So yeah, I think we could throw it over to Tracy to introduce her book, if we could, which I'm also going to get off my shelf here. No, it's not on my shelf behind me. It's in my bedroom. Never mind.
That's okay. I'm so happy to be here. Congratulations, Rosalie. Rosalie and I met in 2012.
Oh, yeah.
2012 at the Center for Fiction in New York City, where we were both fellows at the time. And I remember actually when Rosalie first started becoming interested in espionage as a genre, and she mentioned it one day. This was like years before the first Vera Kelly came out. And so, when Who is Vera Kelly came out, I got a copy, and I remember it was summer, and I had this day where I had this whole luxurious setup. I had gotten special peaches from the farmer's market, and I was getting to eat these peaches and read Who is Vera Kelly, and it was the most wonderful treat, and I love this character so much. I love the wit, and also the way in which she's sort of struggling with the idea of vulnerability and openness and outness in her own life, set against these really high stakes narratives. I just think we're so lucky that we get another one, I guess. So I'm going to read, I guess, a little bit, a couple of minutes from my new novel, Quotients. So this is the novel. I know I have a weird glowy thing happening. This is sort of a literary spy novel also. It's a systems novel as well. And it primarily tells the story of a couple who's trying to make it work, and the man in the couple is a former spy. And so the part that I'm going to read is him remembering something from his past. He was a spy in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. He's British. And he's just received a text message from one of his former spy mates with a mysterious message that says, and the mysterious message is Month of Fools 92. So that's all you need to know going in. He thought about Wright's message, Month of Fools 92. He thought about it and knew there was nothing good to come of it. The last time he had believed any good could come of Northern Ireland was 1991. When Jeremy landed in Lisburn that year, they gave him a name to follow, Gunner. In retrospect, a poor alias, facile. He arrived to Jeremy as paper before flesh, a file, text, date of birth, criminal record, address. He was a Belfast arms liaison, moving lethal technologies to the Republicans, gas-operated guns from Estonian radicals, the Pira Sweetheart Special, M16s. Then, the British had caught him with a shipment of Degtyarev bullets, powerful enough to leave a victim looking exploded instead of shot. On capture, they told him silence was the sound after a dead child hit the earth. Your boy is old enough to know fear, they said. Your boy with the condition. Secrets for the boy, they said. And it had been easy to turn him because the mother of the child was 18 months in the grave. The first time he met Gunner, Jeremy stood in the basement of a fish shop in Shaftesbury, the smell of sea flesh clinging. There were boxes everywhere, an agony of newsprint. In an icebox, black fish eyes stared over gaping mouths. You could see the moment of recognition, the startled look that would stay forever. He slipped ice chips in his hands to clean them of rubbish. Gunner had selected a crate stacked over a pile of collapsed cardboard cartons, plunked down, and Gunner had brushed the metal wheel of a lighter with his thumb so that small blue flames hiccuped in his hand. Got a clinker seat for the show. Will you not take one too? He said. I prefer to stand, Jeremy said, but something about Gunner's smile made him feel foolish. Jeremy had not expected Gunner to be so boyish. The photograph in his pocket that day, small and grayscale, showed only a compromised head against cheap paint. Like making it hard on yourself, do you, Allsworth? We've got business to attend to, Jeremy said. Protestant work ethic will fetch you supper, but it won't win you time to eat it. I'm not a Protestant, he said, flush running up his neck, or a Catholic for that matter. Everyone needs someone to pray to, Allsworth, even the English, Gunner said. Jeremy had not known what to make of the man. He had groped for the tongue of someone in such a position. He had thought of what someone else, someone who did not turn red as jam, would say. You talk a lot for a tout, he said. A freezer groaned in the corner. I suppose that's what touts do. Now, many years removed, Jeremy remembered how that one word had knocked off patina, and Jeremy remembered how when Gunner had finished snitching, he stood face wrung out. Gunner had rubbed his thighs, straightened. He had a way of inviting looks with casual vigor. Jeremy remembered thinking it was a poor quality for a man with secrets, and Jeremy remembered the thought to touch his hand. They had not shaken on meeting, but his own swampy palm remained in his pocket. Did not extend to the informant, the trainers had advised. He will swallow kilometers. That afternoon, Gunner crossed the room. He paused at the door out of the shop basement, turned back abruptly so that the upstairs light bristled around him. Cecil's his name, Gunner said. My boy. I know, Jeremy said. And he'll not be harmed now? I'll make contact again soon, said Jeremy. Already he's company. I burn a toast and he shouts, own goal. You're proud. Don't have one of your own, so, Gunnar said. Jeremy bent down to lace his shoe. You're not a bad man, Osworth, but are you decent? Gunnar asked. Jeremy stood again. Who would believe whoever it is a person claims to be? I'm original, but not creative, Osworth. I won't lie to you. You already did, Jeremy said. The boy isn't speaking yet. The specialists say he's nonverbal autistic. Gunnar shrugged. I figured you for pitiless, but I thought you might be charmed. In that moment, a prickle began. Perhaps not yet the knowledge that nothing good could come of Northern Ireland, but some consciousness of how little he knew. He would not until then have known the inertia of divisions, nor would he have known that one day he would go around his home, turning lights off, Alexandra already dunked under sleep, that looking at her, he would want to blot out the information of his life until she'd arrived in it. Okay. So I think that we're going to have a little conversation now, Rosalie and I, talking about these books. Let's see, Rosalie, do you feel you're ready? Shall I?
I think I'm ready. I'm ready, yeah.
Okay. So I hope this isn't spoiling too much. But in this second Vera Kelly book, Vera Kelly Is Not a Mystery, Vera's life of intrigue takes her to the Dominican Republic in the late 1960s, now under the governance of Balaguer. And I'm wondering what was exciting to you or interesting about this period in Dominican political life?
Well, it's interesting because I think the first thing that made me interested just in DR and the Dominican Republic in general is that like there is this kind of sort of umbilical relationship between New York and the Dominican Republic. I mean, so many people, there's so many Dominicans in New York, people travel so often back and forth from New York and the Dominican Republic. So it's sort of, it's something that like, I felt was sort of just in my environment, just like an awareness of, you know, not very detailed awareness, but an awareness of the history of, the recent history of the island. And it had actually come, like in the first Vera Kelly novel, I had ended up doing just a small amount of research into the 1965 US invasion of the Dominican Republic, because the first book was set in 1966, so this would have happened the year before, and I was kind of looking for like historical hooks to hang, like what would Vera Kelly understand about what the CIA was up to, and like how would she understand the relationship of the United States via the CIA to Latin America in general, and Central America and the Caribbean. So I had looked into that a little bit, and you know, in 1965, the United States just launched just a straight up invasion by the Marines of the Dominican Republic because, you know, Trujillo had been the dictator of the Dominican Republic with US support almost the entire time for, you know, 30 plus years. He was killed in 1961. And following that, there was several years of kind of chaos and turmoil. And then in a democratic election, the people of the Dominican Republic had elected a left-leaning writer, actually. He wrote short stories, which is a crazy thing to imagine a politician doing, I feel like, named Juan Bosch. And the United States was like, no, no, which I think was very often the dynamic, right? The United States basically, you know, and I probably don't have to, this is probably something people already know and realize, but almost always at a minimum has its thumb on the scales, you know, like at a minimum. So when Bosch was elected, they were like, no, like you can pick somebody, but not this guy, basically. So there was an invasion in spring 1965. It was essentially a war. It was over pretty quickly. I mean, it was overwhelming force. A lot of Dominicans were killed. They were dropping bombs on Santo Domingo. And in the aftermath of that, this guy Balaguer, who had been the right-hand man to Trujillo, was elected. And basically was sort of a Trujillo light for the next, you know, dozen years or something like that. And then was president again in the 90s. It would basically be like if like George Bush left and then like Dick Cheney was president. I mean, it was like there was not really much of a break in terms of sort of policy and everything else between these two characters. So so I was interested in that, just as that having been, like for Vera, as like a person who was living in New York and had been around the Caribbean and speaks Spanish, that this like would be an example that she was aware of like recent kind of interference in the hemisphere. And so that's kind of where I started, and it's so close, you know? I mean, I feel like New York has this relationship with Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic, and a lot of the Caribbean that's like very enmeshed. And those places feel really close, I think, when you live in New York. It's like, how many flights, you know, every day out of JFK, and it's like a few hours. So that's where that interest in it came from.
Great. So in the book, and again, I'm worried I'm giving too much away, but I hope it's okay. I did run these questions by you before, Rosalie, so I hope you're okay with it. So in the book, Vera is tasked with looking for a child, and she ends up going to the St. Jerome's Home for Boys, and I'm curious about if you saw this narrative sort of being in dialogue with this long literature about parentless children and sort of the adventures that they get into. In a way, you know, Vera is not an orphan, but she's like a half orphan, or like a proto-orphan, right?
Right.
And so I guess I'm wondering, you know, what was interesting to you about this idea of parentlessness, and you know, if you see yourself in conversation with these books. Yeah.
I think that's a really good question, and actually that question came up for me a lot with my first book, which was not a Vera Kelly book, but it was like a story about a kid, the main character of that book, which is called Relief Map, is 16, and sort of this practical problem kept coming up while I was writing that book, where I needed this underage character to like move around on the map and make decisions and be in danger at different times. But it was always like, well, where are her parents? I had to sort of shuttle her parents off screen all the time so that she could have adventures, because of course the entire purpose, and I'm a parent now myself, but I wasn't at that time, the entire point of being a parent is to prevent your child from having adventures. Like, please, nothing, like anything but an adventure, please. So I feel like and you're right, of course, there's this incredible preponderance of orphans in stories for children, right? Like at Disney, it's like nobody's got a mom or a dad. It's like, you know, Bambi, it's kind of traumatic, but it's like the sense of like, you just got to clear them out of the way so that something dangerous can happen to this child. But it's funny because that wasn't really forefront of my mind with this book. The reason I sort of was interested in foster care was that I had been working in foster care at the time that that happened while I was, during the long course of the time I was writing the first book. I worked for 2 years in residential foster care. So it was a world that I knew a little bit, and that I also kind of needed to exercise emotionally a little bit. So that is why I went there. I was interested in how a kid can get not just separated from their parents, but like misplaced. And in order to like misplace a child, which is basically what happens to the kid here, you need a huge system to lose him in, and that's foster care. So not just in being parentless, but in being just sort of like, oh, we lost your paperwork. Like, I'm afraid. It's like if you're going with your like ticket up to the coat check and you're like, my coat, and they're like, we can't find your coat. Like that kind of bureaucratic nightmare around a child.
Yeah, you do that so well in this book. I love some of those just little details where some of the characters at St. Jerome's act like the paperwork is such a grievous burden, and I could really feel your experience there very much. Yeah, it was funny.
Yeah, I sort of have a return question for you, if I may, which is like, I feel like it's also about relationships, right? Like the kids and parents, but also spy novels, right, tend to have a romantic relationship or like an attempt at a romantic relationship kind of at their center. And I was interested in, you know, I mean, I did that. I felt the pull of that kind of pairing, right, of like the sort of the romance and the you know, the espionage. And you did too. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about sort of how you see espionage, that story and the tropes of that story connecting with the tropes of a love story.
Yeah, I mean, I think that both spy narratives and love stories are often about negotiating between openness and receptivity, right? And being closed, or being an individual and being a part of some type of group that you have an allegiance to, whether that group is a couple or if it's the agency, right? And spy novels and love stories are, you know, grounded in the questions about trust as well. So it seems to me that there's a lot of themes in common. You know, in this case, I had also started writing this book at a time where I knew that I was going to want to get at several spy narratives within the novel. And so just in terms of creating a shape, you know, the relationship kind of was, for me, the way that I could create a shape, a beginning and an end, right? The beginning and end of this relationship. But this is also something in Vera Kelly, right? You know, I think that Vera really in this book is experimenting and thinking even more about relationships. I see her playing with the possibility of vulnerability a little bit more, and like the possibilities of queer community and queer relationships just sort of like shimmer throughout this book. And I loved that. And so I guess that I sort of just wanted to ask you about how you thought about love, and maybe especially queer love, offering hope in this genre. I mean, it's sort of both a spy novel and a detective novel, right? But neither, right, are normally thought of as super hopeful. So I wonder if you could just talk about that, sort of like.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. It's true that often in like a classic spy story or private detective story, usually there's a love interest, but usually it doesn't work out.
Yeah.
Right? And often like a love story that's ended horribly is sort of the origin story for like a spy or a private detective, right? Like the classic one is like the male spy or detective and his beautiful wife who was murdered. Like that's sort of a classic one. And then like maybe he'll get involved with some sort of sexy stranger who turns out to be a betrayer, you know, like that kind of thing. I wanted her to, like I said, I thought of this as a 3-book arc. Like after the first book, I was thinking of it as something where there would be 2 more. And I wanted her, I knew she was gonna have romantic problems. She was gonna get her heart broken, but I did want her to end up having figured out for herself how to have intimacy and how to share her life with somebody. I wanted to see that because I felt like the process of like a young person who has a hard time doing that and who maybe has a difficult background with that. Maybe her father died when she was little. Her mom is not a nurturing or supportive person. I found, you know, and maybe especially as a therapist, like I found something compelling about the idea of like, we follow this person as she figures out how to do relationships and have relationships. So I wanted her to end up in a good place relationship-wise for narrative reasons, but also, and this sort of came forward in discussions with my writing group and with my friends, there's also a long history, you know, for most of the 20th century, you could kind of get away with depicting queer lives and queer love stories, but only if they failed. And sort of the classic thing would be like a gay romance, but one of them dies tragically at the end. So, you know, it felt like it was important to me to have her end up happily partnered. which would normally be like a very square way to envision a story. Maybe it is. I'm a little bit square in that way. I love a story that ends with a wedding or whatever. But also in this way, it felt like it was kind of felt like sort of politically important, like to like end up with her happy. So that's why the book starts with a breakup rather than ending with a breakup. I needed to like position it in such a way that you didn't have the classic sort of Hays Code thing of like, okay, these two people can have a connection briefly, but then like one of them has to fall off a cliff. So, so yeah, there's a couple of layers there, but yeah, that was my idea.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, there's like one of the sort of classic texts of of queer studies is called The Queer Art of Failure, and yeah, I think that idea of the relationship being sort of preemptively foreclosed is something that you write against so beautifully here. And it makes it fun, but also like revolutionary in this way. So that's great. That's very cool. You spoke about there's emotional development as a character. And one of the things that I was most attracted to in Vera's character is that there are several points at which she feels something and it's like a surprise to her. Right? So at one point you write, I had withdrawn, I could feel it happening, it was almost physical. And in these moments when Vera is sort of like surprised by her emotions, it's almost as though her emotional life is like outside of her, or that it happened prior to her in some way, right? Like prior to her consciousness. So I was wondering about the title, Vera Kelly Is Not a Mystery. Is it meant to be a little bit ironic, and I guess another way of putting that is Vera a mystery to herself?
I think she is a little bit mysterious to herself. I liked the idea, and this is of course like a spy trope, right? But sort of like a coolness of manner that maybe is actually just being a little bit dissociated all the time. So I was kind of interested in the idea that like, I think you're right. That's something that I kind of resort to often, where she's having a feeling and she's sort of like what is that? You know, like, or that like a physical response clues her into the fact that she's upset. Like she might notice that her face feels hot before she kind of registers like, I am embarrassed right now, you know? And yeah, I think there's something that's interesting to me about that. There's a way where if the character is sort of explaining her feelings to herself in this slightly distanced way, then that's also a way that I can explain them as the narrator to the reader. But also she's coming out of the repressed 1950s, right? She was born in 1940, so she was a teenager in the 50s. She's used to, as a queer teenager and adult, she's used to sort of compartmentalizing off parts of herself. And then on top of that, she lost her father young, and her mother is sort of this like icy, this sort of, her mother is an extremely competent person who like does not really recognize and certainly does not reward or nurture weakness. So she's learned to kind of be like, I'm on a video call, so I forgot this, but I'm sitting up very straight. This is like, she's just a little bit checked out from her emotional life much of the time. Yeah. And so I think she is somewhat of a mystery to herself. She's in the process of becoming less of a mystery to herself. I think that was kind of how I saw the project of the three books.
Well, that was also her personality that I really connected to, which I probably shouldn't admit.
It's a very functional way to operate in some circumstances. Yeah. Academia, espionage, all of those kinds of environments.
Right. Well, yeah, you might have uncovered my secret.
Yeah, maybe so. And I sort of wanted to ask you a craft question too, because I was so interested in the way, like reading through dialogue in your book, like there's a way, I feel like there's a specific challenge to espionage fiction where there's generally a lot going on in the background, and there's a difference. There's what you, the narrator, know, and then there's what you're allowing the reader to know at different points in the book, and then there's what the characters know, which of course some of them know much more than others, and they're constantly kind of trading that knowledge between themselves, explaining or not explaining things, lying in scene, which you like are either signaling to the reader or are not signaling to the reader is a lie. So like,
Right.
I was really interested the way you were handling that in dialogue, because I noticed that you were okay. It felt like you were okay with letting the reader kind of be suspended in uncertainty through these scenes, and kind of letting them gather the pieces slowly and put them together. And so I was just curious about how you thought about exposition and dialogue and all of those kinds of craft pieces in this context.
Yeah. Well, I think that maybe one way of explaining it is sort of thinking about the way that I view this book's function in the world, right? So, this book is a spy narrative, and I do play with some of those tropes, but it's also very much an indictment of surveillance, and the massive surveillance that is happening today, both by governmental actors and private companies, especially online. And so one of the things that I wanted to do was to sort of bring the reader into this position of, like those entities, wanting to know, and get to the answer, and like understand who everybody is, and resist that a little bit, because I want the reader to both sort of understand, where it comes from, this desire that we have, I think, as a society, to know and to spy because we believe it will keep us safe, or that it's going to provide important answers. But at the same time, there's a way in which the stories of our lives don't provide those answers, right? We can live through them and never find out who the person is who have made various things in our lives happen, right? So the characters don't always find out in this book why things have happened to them, who's sort of allied with who, where the sort of the sides are, what the teams are, right, in this global spy project, right? And so I suppose that that's where, or that's why I don't always provide answers, is because I both want readers to feel like that frustration that drives us to continue as a society to seek answers and intelligence, but also to sort of be wary of it, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, as you're talking, that's something I was sort of struggling to articulate, but there is an overheard quality to it, to some parts of it. Of course, there's plenty of exposition and like, sort of guiding people through the scene, but there's definitely, it feels like you've like very artfully, by kind of using natural speech patterns, and sort of allowing some things to go unexplained, there is this feeling of like, I'm only hearing this because I'm eavesdropping. So of course, I'm not getting the explanation for everything that I'm hearing. It has an eavesdropping quality to it, which I think is very effective.
Thank you. Yeah. And I think the characters are also sort of like the type of people that are talking in code a little bit to each other.
Yes.
And part of sort of the creation of a relationship between the reader and the characters is for the reader to be able to think like, well, if I'm hearing this, like, what's the game that I'm playing, right?
Right.
With this other person in this relationship. So, yeah.
So it's just about time to segue into some audience questions. And while people can either unmute and ask a question, just raise your hand and let us know that you'd like to, or you can absolutely ask in the chat if you don't want to be recorded. And while we're waiting for people to have a chance to type into the chat, I thought I'd ask what you're both working on right now, and how writing in quarantine is going or not going, because we've heard both answers from various writers through this time.
Yes, okay, so I'm working on the third book in the trilogy, but I also started a new thing, and I've just been going back and forth. I think I really enjoy writing the third thing, but I also had been sort of thinking about a sort of unrelated project for so long that it was like kind of exciting to get a chance to just like start and write a few pages of it. So I've been going back and forth between the third Vera Kelly novel and kind of an unrelated freestanding novel, which is very exciting to me also. But I have very limited time. I have 1 hour every morning and I can do this. So I'm really trying to maximize that 1 hour. That's how it's been going for me.
Yeah, I've written a couple of essays since the book, but I haven't started a new book project where I'm actually at the writing phase. I've been doing a little bit of research and sort of still conceptualizing it a little bit. So yeah.
Well, Tracy, you also just completed a PhD, so I think you got some time to put your feet up.
Yeah.
I've got a question for everyone. One of the things we traditionally do at Booktopia is ask our authors if there's any contemporary and new books or old favorites that you guys would like to pitch to our attendees. Is there anything particularly that comes to mind that either of you'd like to praise?
Let me hold on. Let me look at the list. Let me look at the books that are on my phone right now while Tracy feels free to answer those questions.
Sure, yeah. Did you mean like within the spy genre or generally, or?
Just absolutely generally. Linda is a constant booktopian. She's always there, and she says just anything, whether it's old, new, within the spy genre, whatever you'd like to talk about.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Well, I think like one book that I recommend to basically, oh gosh, that's my alarm. Well, one book that I recommend to like anybody who is alive is Heavy by Kiese Lehmann, which came out, I guess, maybe like a year ago now. And it's a memoir. It's absolutely beautiful. And, you know, it tells the story of this man's life. But I mean, really, I think also sort of America. And it's so beautiful. It's written as sort of an address to his mother. And I really, really love that book. Some books that have come out recently that might be interesting for people. You mentioned Marie-Helene Bertino earlier, and her book Parakeet just came out. She's, you know, totally delightful. I recently, just before we were on this call, was in an event with Annalise Chen, who wrote a book called So Many Olympic Exertions that I love. It's sort of told in these shards of narrative, but also with sort of, you know, anecdotes and images, and it's very unexpected. It sort of uses sports to sort of reflect on life, and so I love this book so much. I think Annalise is such an interesting, cool mind. So those are some books that, you know.
Just chiming in to say that Kiese Lehmann came to our Saratoga store for the paperback tour for Heavy, and it was, you know, there are some nights in the bookstore that I remember as being particularly magical, and that was one of them. It's an incredible book, and he's also an incredible speaker and an incredible advocate for his work. So yes, just doubling down on the recommendation for that book, which I agree that every human should read.
Yeah.
I hesitate because I've lately been doing sort of a sideways kind of novel research. So most of the last few books I've read have not come out anytime recently. But I've been reading a bunch of, I was interested in books that take place in a single day or in a really short period of time. So I had a bunch of people recommended Room Temperature to be by Nicholson Baker, which I just started, and it's kind of a lovely movement of kind of prose. And I had read The Pilgrim Hawk, which is a novella by Glenway Westcott before that, which is this wonderful kind of like absolutely brutal and like eviscerating portrait from I think the 1930s of a marriage like happening across a single afternoon. This like couple comes to visit, and it's like absolutely compelling and absolutely just an indictment of like the entire concept of having a relationship with anyone, as far as I can tell. Which I do recommend. And then I've been reading some kind of nonfiction based on ecology too, because I don't know about you guys, but I've been in my apartment in Jersey City, obviously for 3 months. And so I found myself becoming kind of preoccupied with like the bits of nature that I could see from my 3rd floor windows. So like the trees nearby, the birds that live in those trees, which I'm basically on a first name basis with now, the raccoons in the backyard across the way. So the upshot of this was that I read this natural history of coyotes, called Coyote America, excuse me, by Dan Flores, which is this great kind of epic view of the evolution of coyotes as a species and how they've moved from the West all the way across the North America into eastern cities, and have now been spotted in every state except for Hawaii. And then I just started Gotham Unbound, which is an ecological survey of like New York and surrounding, like basically the waterways around New York City, which of course includes my part of New Jersey. So that's what I've sort of been caught up with.
Cool.
Those are all good books.
Thank you both. If we had done an in-person event, I would have done a much more elaborate introduction that included discussion of, Rosalie, your work as a translator. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I've got some of that stuff back here too. My son's crying. Yeah, I translated, so, you know, my first Vera Kelly book is set in Argentina, and my interest in Argentina was because I had been there for 8 months teaching English and also doing a translation of a book by Cesar Ira called The Seamstress in the Wind, who's had a lot of his books come out with new directions over the last few years. And I actually got to meet him, and he kind of reviewed very casually and flexibly reviewed the translation that I completed. You can bring him out. You don't have to hide him away. It's okay. Sorry.
I think it would make all of our day to see him if you want to bring him out.
Right now he's like,
oh.
But so I had, yeah, so that was the translation that I did, and that was a few years ago now, but yes, it was a super fun project, and a really, for someone who's primarily a fiction writer, it's really interesting to translate a book. It's like, just like being sort of inside someone else's process in a weird way without them there.
Very interesting. I think we are just about out of time, unless anyone has a last question that they'd like to jump in with. But I think that this is unfortunately time to say goodbye. It's been another great night on Northshire Live. Thank you so much, both Rosalie and Tracy. It was really wonderful meeting you both and hearing about your work. I hope that we can see you in one Northshire location or the other in person sometime in the future. Tracy, we are not that far from Vassar, so if you do move to Tracy and want to pop a little further up the river sometime, we would love to have you anytime.
I would love that.
Fantastic! Yay! Future events.
It'd be fantastic.
Yes, we know that we'll get to events in person again one day, so we'll look forward to that. For those of you who want to tune in to more Northshire Live digital events, we have Kirsten Kimball next week. She is the author of The Dirty Life and her new book, Good Husbandry. She is a farmer and an author, and will be interviewed by a fellow farmer and author, Jenna Wogan-Rich, and that is on Tuesday. So hopefully we'll see you all then. And thank you again, Rosalie and Tracy, and thanks everyone for being here. This was another lovely evening, and we'll see you all real soon.
Thank you. Thank you guys for having me. Thank you, Tracy, for being here.
Yes, thank you guys so much.
That's my parents there also. Hi. Okay.
Hi, Rosalie's parents. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, bye. Thank you.
Take care.